Hey guys, and welcome back to the 9th episode of the Magic Shooter tutorial. In this episode, we'll help set up the game infrastructure and environment a bit more, including the spawning system for the enemies. Enemies will be able to continually spawn at us until we die. To do this, we want to create a new class, EnemySpawnInfo. This data structure will help us determine how we want to spawn our enemies and what enemies to spawn. In this data structure, we want to have a few editor variables: the enemy name, the prefab for the enemy, the time between spawns, and the number of enemies to spawn. This is the data structure that we'll be using to create information for each of the enemies that we want to be spawned. And like before, we'll have a public getter function for each variable. Now, we'll create a new script, EnemySpawner, to actually handle spawning enemies. First, we want to establish our editor variables. Our enemies spawn in random positions, so we'll have bounds that determine the boundary of our area. EnemySpawnInfo determines the type of enemies that we're going to spawn. We've only created one, so don't worry too much about this for now. This structure just lets us expand on the game easier if we want to make more enemies, just like with our system for our abilities. To spawn enemies, we want to create a coroutine spawn in a new region for enemy spawn methods. The coroutine takes all of the data that we've created from EnemySpawnInfo and instantiates enemies at random positions from within the bounds of the arena. We want to set it so that if number to spawn is equal to 0, it will infinitely spawn. For that, we want to have a check as well as a bool that we will know when to spawn enemies. Inside the while loop, we're going to wait for the next spawn time by returning a wait for seconds, and then select a random location within the bounds of the position of the enemy spawner. After we're given this, we want to instantiate the enemy. Then, we want to increase the counter so that we can stop when we have enough enemies. Now, we want our script to start spawning enemies as soon as it starts, so we'll call a helper function in await. This helper will start the spawn coroutine for each enemy in the array of enemy info. Back in the editor, we want to create an empty game object and name it EnemySpawnManager. Attach the enemy spawner script to it. We want to set the bounds to the horizontal plane, so the bounds are 90, 1, and 90. Since we only have one enemy, we're going to make the list size 1 and fill in the name ghost enemy, the prefab that we have, and set the enemy to spawn forever at 1 second intervals. Now that we have an enemy spawner, we want to set up a nice environment to play in. To do that, we'll get rid of everything but the player, camera, UI, and the enemy spawner in the scene. So delete any enemies, any health pills, or anything else you may have added. We'll add the environment prefab into the scene. In the environment, there should be 2 spotlights so we can delete the directional light. Both should have a look at object script, which needs a transform. We'll be placing the player transform into here as the transform for the script. This script follows the player around and makes sure that wherever the player goes, the lights will follow and the scene will be properly lit for the camera. We can play it and see that we can run around, shoot at enemies, and slowly die. We've successfully managed to set up an enemy spawn system as well as a more well-established arena to play in. In the next episode, we'll start expanding into the main menu and scene transitions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.